Welcome to the Business of Sound. I'm David Segura, the CEO of Glassbox Media, and I'm your host for today's episode. What we're trying to do with the Business of Sound is to give you some actionable insights into the world of podcasting. So whether you're a marketing executive, a founder, or a podcaster, we want you to be able to take what you need to do from this show and put it into action. Every other Thursday, I'm going to be talking to one of our key team members here at Glassbox Media, Aaron O'Toole, and we're going to basically review insights and trends that are specific to the podcast and the audio industry. We hope that you'll not only find it interesting, but also maybe something you might even research or look further into to figure out, how it applies to your business.
Awesome. I'm super excited to be here, David. And then for our first topic today, we are talking about Wondery's new announcement for their original podcast, Flipping the Bird, Elon versus Twitter, dealing with Elon Musk's Twitter takeover. So I'm sure you're really excited. I know you're a big fan of Twitter, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Elon Musk.
Before answering that, though, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to this amazing studio and the creators of it. So we're here at Foxgrove live from Soho, New York, which is just down the street from our beautiful office, also in Soho, New York. But I'm just looking around now and just kind of blown away by our whole setup. Obviously, a lot of people are listening, not watching, so you can't see it. But trust me when I say it's good. Additionally, too, just over the years, a lot of great artists have actually been recorded here, whether it's Jay-Z or the Psychedelic Furs, and it's amazing that we're here now. So.
Yeah, honestly, it is very incredible and very distracting, to be honest. But no, we're really, really grateful that Foxgrove is hosting us today. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Elon Musk.
It's a controversial take, but I actually like Elon Musk. I've always liked him. I'm a little bit upset about the whole Tesla stock performance thing, but that's more of a personal opinion. So it is what it is. But yeah, Twitter's fun. I mean, it's one of those things where I doom scroll a lot, and I think it's funny for me. It's unintentionally hilarious, but they have some issues. We'll leave it at that, and I guess we can get started.
Yeah, for sure. So this whole show is Wondery's releasing a 6-episode podcast called Flipping the Bird, Elon versus Twitter, coming out on April 24th. The podcast is hosted by David W. Brown, who also hosts Wondery hit podcast Business Wars. Brown is a veteran public radio journalist with more than 3 decades of experience. Flipping the Bird tells the story of Elon Musk taking charge of Twitter and the world's digital public square and unpredictable events that followed. The podcast includes never-before interviews that examine themes of power, money, and ego. The first 2 episodes will be released on Wondery Plus on April 24th, followed by the wide release on May 1st. Flipping the Bird is the latest in the series of the Rip from the Headlines business investigations by Brown, whose work on Business Wars has won several awards. So it should be a really interesting take. I'm really excited to listen to it. My first question for you, David, is about controversial figures like Elon Musk. Do you think it's going to have a positive or negative effect on the podcast industry?
I don't know. I mean, it'll have an impact, obviously. Elon Musk has an outsized reputation. People are bound to take note of anything he does. But at the end of the day, the Twitter drama, it's an ongoing kind of thing that I think is more specific to Twitter and that platform and Elon Musk than it is podcast and audio. In other words, I think the real question that people are wondering is if it's somehow going to impact negatively the podcasting industry. And the short answer, without being too dramatic, is no.
Yes. No, I totally agree. I mean, people do documentaries about serial killers all the time. So Elon Musk isn't that bad. Anyways, moving on. So how important do you think the host of a podcast is to determine its success? I know David W. Brown is a strong host for the Business Wars podcast. How do you think he'll perform for Flipping the Bird?
I think he'll probably do well. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a podcast is only as good as their hosts. Even the mistakes, the intimacy, the story they're trying to tell. I mean, I personally love Business Wars. I listen to it all the time. I have to believe that this format will probably work for him. I mean, everybody does have missteps, but it sounds like it's right up his alley. He's going to basically dive into the backstories, the innuendos, the shit talk, for lack of a better term. So I have a feeling it's going to be good.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this is a very niche audience. People are interested in Twitter and Elon Musk, business. As a Instagram lover, how do you think this podcast is going to reach a wider range of audiences and listeners?
It's a good question. I mean, I'll put it this way. Obviously, Business Wars, business content is for everyone, men, women, you name it. But there is a tendency to skew a little bit more towards men. And when you also think about Elon, let's say lovers, but also the haters, it's also kind of male-centric. So for that reason, I think it'll actually find a pretty broad audience. I think people like hearing about business drama, for lack of a better term, and there's certainly a lot of people that orbit around Elon Musk because of everything he does. So to be honest, I think it's a Gen Pop podcast that'll actually be probably well received.
Awesome. And my last question is, this show is being produced by Wondery. So what role would Wondery and any network play in the success of a podcast?
Yeah, so Wondery obviously has a lot of taste. Hernan Lopez founded that company many years ago in Los Angeles, a pretty decent guy, and he's got a background in production. And I think the current team that's running it kind of carries that taste and sensibility, and they know exactly kind of what they're doing. While they have had some shows that are bigger than others, Business Wars is honestly one of their marquee formats, especially beyond the true crime scope. And I have no doubt that they're going to do well, especially now that they got that Amazon moolah. So
we love that for them. Mm-hmm. All right, moving on to our next topic. Pew Research examines podcasts as a source of news and information. Now, bear with me, audience. It's a lot of data here. According to Pew Research, podcasts have become a big part of Americans' routine and news diet, with about half of the U.S. adults saying they have listened to a podcast in the last year. Comedy and entertainment, pop culture, and the arts are among the most common podcast topics for listeners. 2/3 of podcast listeners say they have heard the news discussed on a podcast they listen to, amounting to 1/3 of all U.S. adults. Only 29% of the U.S. podcast listeners say staying up to date with current events is a major reason why they listen to podcasts, while 60% listen for entertainment and 55% for learning. Many podcast listeners engage with podcasts in ways other than just listening, such as watching movies, reading books, or trying out lifestyle changes. 1 in 5 listeners say they listen to a podcast that's connected to a news organization, suggesting that most of the news people are exposed to on the podcast could be coming from non-traditional sources. Republican podcast listeners are more likely than Democrats to trust the news they hear on a podcast more than news they get from other sources. And younger Americans are more likely than older age groups to be listening to a podcast. 2/3 of Americans ages 18 to 29 having listened to a podcast in the last 12 months. So that's a lot to digest and a lot of stats there. My first question for you is, since the study found that fewer Americans turn to podcasts for news compared to entertainment and learning, how do you think the impact of the types of podcasts will be created in the future?
Yeah, and so just to dive into the question, I'll just say this, I don't know. I mean, for me personally, I've always had this bias or this thought, even though I'm in the podcast industry, that podcasting is very sort of NPR centric, and that's kind of like the audience. But the truth is, it's a good thing that I think it's expanding now to entertainment, pop culture, you name it, sports. There's something for everyone. So the fact that people maybe aren't prioritizing learning or career enhancement or whatever, to me is not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that podcasting is going so broad and so mainstream that it's essentially no different in some ways, dare I say, to TV. So I'm cool with that. All that data, that makes sense. I don't think it's a dark story, but I'm sure there's going to still be a lot of hand-wringing from the New York Times types.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think a big thing that people will probably take from this is the issue of fake news. And with non-traditional media sources like podcasting, especially hosts that don't necessarily have, not to say a credible background, but not the most traditional background in reporting news, I think it's can be like a fear or doomsday type of take. But I'd love to hear what you think about, spreading fake news or just podcasting opinion versus fact.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the source, right? I think spreading fake news in general is bad. It's hard to argue otherwise. But on a personal level, speaking of Twitter and now this article, I like shit posting. I like trolling. It's really fun for me, and I like to get my kicks out of that. But honestly, I think most people in the context that I'm doing it understand that I'm mostly joking. And so there's really no negative harm. If it's a real news source, whether it's a podcast or something else that people take as a credible source where they're actually spreading fake news, well, of course, that's terrible. But I don't really know how we monitor that, how we police it. I ultimately believe in the freedom of speech. I think to some extent, even in the U.S., for example, I'm not saying I would do it, but even lying is actually a protected form of speech. It's when it starts causing harm that, you're liable and could obviously have a lot of damages, if you will. So I have mixed feelings on that. I'm not a big pro-censorship guy, even though a lot of people these days, I think, are.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm also curious to see like what they were qualifying as news, because there's pop culture news. There's like, what's going on abroad, like government politics style. So it could be interesting. Like misrepresenting the Hailey Bieber and Selena Gomez drama could be considered news, but
Is there a little hostility there? Like, I'm actually curious about that.
oh, David.
If there is, I just want to say for the record, for all the listeners and the viewers out there, I'm on the side of Selena Gomez.
Yeah, as you should be. Yeah. As you should be. I don't want to throw hate or shade to Hailey because they squashed it, but there was some tension and reading between the lines of social media posts that the media, like social media, like all the followers really got involved, and we can definitely incorporate more pop culture headlines in here as well because I would love that for us. Awesome. We can talk about that more offline, but I'll pop over to our next subject. Another study conducted by Pew Research Center found that 65% of respondents who named a podcast they listen to most feel connected to the podcast host, and frequent listeners feel an even stronger connection. So a couple questions I have for you is, do podcasts have a unique ability to build personal connection with their audience compared to other forms of media?
Well, probably, because I think podcasting, no matter how large they get, are still a form of like niche casting. It's like a very dedicated following that probably has a personal connection to the host or the host, and certainly the subject matter. So I believe it's going to be a little bit more intimate than like a show on ABC or something like that. So for that reason, I think it's definitely the case. And that does give you a unique ability, whether we're talking about like commercial applications or even creative ones as well.
Yeah. I think it just proves the testament that people are really dedicated to their their hosts. Mm-hmm. And I know you can talk to this more, but different derivatives from a podcast, like tours and things like that. How do you think hosts can really take advantage of their dedicated audience?
I mean, it's happening now. There's like a podcast called The Dropout that is now a show on Hulu. One of our visions, obviously, here at Glassbox is that in time we want to publish books, not only do live tours and events, but certainly also TV show adaptations too. I think based on my experience working with TV executives, I mean, they're great, but they're very conservative. They don't like to take a lot of risks for good reason. And so they want properties that are well known, and they want to adapt that so they can remarket it to an existing audience that they hope will carry over to whatever it is that they're trying to do. So I kind of feel like the adaptation market is not only blowing up, but it's only going to get larger. Mm-hmm. And, honestly, almost word for word, I plan to say all this to one of our investors later today in our meeting. So, but I believe it. So,
yeah, even with like books and publications, like Book Talk is huge, and it's making, people read more and then turn those into shows. And I'm sure they'll just follow the same suit for podcasting. Do you have like a special bond or attachment to a podcast host?
Our hosts, I guess, but
of course,
for obvious reasons. I don't know. I mean, I definitely like some podcasts more than others. I've actually talked to a few of the hosts from the football show, which is one of the athletic podcasts. I love soccer, not American football. So it's just fun for me to listen to that and feel like I am like kind of connected. It's not because we're bros or anything. I just want to follow like all the drama happening behind the scenes in the Premier League. So everyone has like their own association and like thought that those are their guys, whether they actually know each other or not. So it's different. It's different from a TV show. Even though I like Succession, I don't feel like a special connection to HBO or Discovery Warner. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to pop over to our next topic in today's podcast. Spotify Advertising and Magna's Media Trials conducted a study called The Togetherness Effect: Why Brands Should Be Paying Attention to Co-Listening. The study found that 74% of respondents said they co-listen to a digital audio at least once a week, and the majority of adult Gen Zers said the same. Co-listening tends to put people in a positive mood, which can affect their perceptions of ads and when they are well targeted. Co-listeners were exposed to storytelling and product-focused ads, and the storytelling ads performed better. The study found that most common types of moments for co-listening are relaxing, hanging out with friends, cooking, entertaining the kids, and doing yoga. So my first initial question is, how do you see the rise of co-listening impacting the podcast industry?
I think it's cool. That's a really interesting study. Definitely, read about that. And it's something that we've talked a lot about in the office. So as an example, we've signed a few recent, like kind of family and even dare I say kids entertainment shows. One of them being Who's Smarted, which is created by this amazing team that has been literally nominated for multiple Emmys for their TV show, Brain Games. But to get to the point, that's a show, while geared for kids, is clearly being listened to by the whole family. at least one of the parents and certainly one or several of the kids. So we've actually found that advertisements and the call to actions are really geared more towards the parent, but it goes without saying that they won't be watching that content unless there's like a genuine bond, a reason for them to be together as a family unit. So whether it's that type of content, Who's Smart or what have you, we definitely encourage that. People that do listen together tend to get more into it. Even when they debate aspects of it or like certain things and don't like certain things of it, it tends to form more of an attachment. So how do we drive more of that in the future, whether it's Glassbox or the industry? I'm not precisely sure, but that's definitely something in a vacuum. If we could, we'd want to encourage it further.
Absolutely. And in terms of monetization, it's hard to tell who is co-listening in a podcast. But for Who's Smart, for example, a teacher could be playing it for a whole classroom of students. So one ad could be heard amongst like 35 people all at once. How do you price things like that and take accountability of like the reach that you're actually getting versus the download that's showing up?
Yeah, it's not a perfect science. So I think one comment we'd have to make is that we know certain shows are being co-listened to. At least we have very plausible theories, whether it's Who's Smarted or Everything Everywhere Daily, a show that is about education meets history meets travel. We know Gary's show is actually played in a lot of schools in Wisconsin for that very reason. It's educational, it's fun, and many people are listening to it. We haven't directly yet tried to yield a premium CPM for that reason, but I can tell you in general, because of our high opinion of the show, we do tend to adhere to the rate card, which is pretty high, anywhere from $35 to $40. So I do think in the future, as we gather more data, more stats, whether it's about those shows or other shows, I do think podcast producers and companies should be able to yield a higher CPM for those reasons that you just said. It's the type of show that was designed to be listened to by multiple people.
Absolutely. And another thing I want to touch on is that this study found that storytelling advertisements perform better than product-based advertisements. So how do you think brands can include more storytelling in their ads, especially when working with hosts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it just depends, right? I think brands and companies and the host all have to work together symbiotically. Not to toot our own horn, but maybe a little bit. Part of Glassbox advantage, as an example, is that we're exclusive and working for many years basically with our hosts. So because of that, they trust us. We lead into the process. We talk to them. We're not some like rando agency or ad rep firm which just gives them ads to read and just be done with it. We hear even critical comments, sometimes which we don't care to hear, from the host, and inevitably they're trying to customize and make the ad more intimate. In other words, maybe they don't want to read for 60 seconds, maybe they want to read for several minutes, maybe they want to go off script. And I think all those things are good. Generally, brands obviously have certain sensitivities, whether that means you can't talk about this or you absolutely need to deliver this one sentence. But for the most part, to quote Almost Famous, like they just want to be made to look cool. They want it to work, they want to succeed, and they tend to defer more to talent. So the real issue here is just communication, like who's facilitating that. If there is none, it's most likely not to perform well, but when it's done well, it can be done really well because honestly, a lot of the hosts are magic and they know what to do to speak to their audience.
Do you think this will open a door for more opportunities creatively for hosts to work with brands beyond a 60-second mid-roll ad?
Yeah, I think it's happening. I think, we're doing that, and certainly other companies, I think, are doing that well as well. Later today, I shouldn't get too much into it, so I'll just say that a CPG company geared more towards families and especially kids, we have a call with them later, and part of that call is really going to center around shows like Who's Smarted and others that have the ability to customize content, where they give them literally 100% share voice, which in non-jargony language just means a show that only has one sponsor and none others. So what they're really looking for in this format is not just kind of 60-second ad reads, to your point, but brand placement, conversation about their history, something that goes well beyond just like what my co-founder Chris might call spots and dots. So we welcome that. But at the same time too, before I make it sound like the most obvious and best thing ever, it takes a lot of time and trust. It's not something that just flies off the shelf. So I think as the industry matures, as companies mature more, we'll be able to do a lot more of these deals, whether it's with this company or several others. And we hope to be able to announce that relatively soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially working on the brand partnerships team, I think it'd be really exciting. And our hosts would be really into that because that's what they want, that like true partnership for like niche audiences with brands that are relevant to their show.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, that's all I have for the headlines. Next, we can pop over to Glassbox Media News. We have a new signing. Dan Miller and his podcast, 48 Days to the Work You Love, are officially part of the Glassbox Media family. David, do you want to speak more to 48 Days?
It's an amazing podcast, and obviously Dan's an incredibly talented guy, but one comment I do want to make that I think is really funny and kind of unique to the podcasting industry is that Dan is the father of Kevin Miller, who's the host of Self-Helpful, one of our larger shows. So I'm excited about that. It's literally growing our family with other people's family. And I think it's just one of those things that the audience, I think, will really love, but I know that we certainly will too. So is, a big key to like us monetizing and growing these franchises is not just selling them individually, but bundling them together. So it is a little bit ironic that we'll be able to bundle both of them together. And I think, that's something that's really special. So I'm excited.
Yes, I'm super excited too. And then other news, we have Shanna Game and her popular podcast, Everyone's Talking Money, a part of the Glassbox Media family as well. And I can't wait to have another female host on our roster. Do you have any additional comments about Everyone's Talking Money?
Yeah, she's great. Very high energy. We're excited to welcome her to the team as well. And, as a category, it's important. There's a lot of folks that want to basically figure out ways to kind of grow their financial portfolio, manage it better, and just have like real conversations about something that frankly can be stressful to a lot of people from all walks of life. So I know you're already out there selling the show.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear that. And she's excited as well. So like pretty pumped to grow that theme in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excied to listen more to the podcast because I myself have issues with spending money, but topic for a different day. David, do you have any other updates for Glassbox Media News?
The company just continues to grow. We just added a new executive to the team, Philo Davidson, who's a close personal friend and someone I actually went to college with many years ago at the University of Chicago, many, many years ago. But great addition to the team. And just we continue to grow and just execute on the plan, and I couldn't be happier.
Yes, I'm super excited to see how things are going. All right, well, that's all I have.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for listening to this episode of Business of Sound. As always, this show is produced by Nick Kastner and Erica Miranda. And if it behooves you, we'd love for you to leave us a positive review on Apple. It helps with our rankings, so don't feel shy to hit that 5-star review button. Additionally, if you'd like to follow us, you're welcome to do so on Instagram, LinkedIn, or the social media of your choice. And as always, Business of Sound will be back every Thursday, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much for listening.